Hello ladies and gentlemen, today Blizzard made a very interesting announcement with respect to the game Hearthstone. They've introduced formats, so they have two formats that are upcoming in 2016, the spring of 2016 that is. One standard format which will be essentially 2 years of previous cards and card expansions, plus the classic set, plus the basic set. So current plan for the standard format in the spring is Basic, Classic, Blackrock Mountain, the Grand Tournament, League of Explorers, and then a to-be-announced spring of 2016 expansion. The second format they've come up with is the Wild expansion, which is basically every card that's ever been printed. So, what other changes did they announce today? They announced that we are getting 18 deck slots, which is a big positive for anybody that's had to go back and delete decks. The other thing that they said is that Arena is going to be using the Wild format, which is kind of interesting because I thought they would have gone with the standard format for Arena. As far as ranks are concerned, in rank mode, there will be separate ranks. So there'll be one rank for standard mode, there'll be one rank for the Wild mode. They've indicated that quests can be completed in either the Wild mode or the standard mode, but that the ranked versions of those modes won't actually share ranks. So they'd be a separate rank for Wild, separate rank for Standard. Somewhat controversially, they've also announced that the previous adventures like Naxxramas and eventually like Blackrock, Molten Core will not be purchasable after they've cycled out of the Standard format. What will happen after that, if you want a card from one of those adventures, is you would have to craft it. There's been a bit of controversy over that, and I'm going to talk about it in just a little bit. But first, I want to talk about what does this mean for the new player, because if you'd watched my previous Hearthstone series, you knew that a while ago I had said that they need to come in with a standard format ASAP, or they're going to essentially block out the new player from having a competitive experience in Hearthstone. So this is exactly what the new player needs to be able to come in. When you're coming into the game now, you're going to have only a handful of adventures to purchase, and then probably a couple of different packs. You're going to have to buy classic packs and probably 1 to 2 other expansion packs to buy to become competitive in the standard format. Had they not done this, and in order for the new player to be competitive in Wild on a going forward basis, the new player would have to buy all kinds of cards. You'd have to buy Classic, GVG, the Grand Tournament, on and on. All the adventures, plus crafting the legendaries that you would need. It would be insurmountable for the new player to get into the game. So having this standard format was exactly what the new players needed. The other positive benefit to having the standard format is that they can remove certain mechanics or certain cards from the standard metagame, which allows them to develop new and interesting cards that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise because of the combos or the synergy that would have occurred with the older cards in the standard format. This is not a money grab, as some people have said. This is a way to keep a card game fresh. Those of you who are familiar with Magic the Gathering, as I am, I've been playing the game since the early 90s when it first came out, know that they have these types of formats in Magic as well. The standard is basically your tournament sort of gold standard for the card game. Then they've got Modern, they've got Legacy, they've got Vintage, they've got Limited, i.e. Arena. These types of formats are needed in order to allow new players to come in order to allow the designers to have freedom to not break the game, essentially. And if you've ever watched a vintage game, you know those games don't last very long. You can have combos of cards in the game that last 5-6 minutes to play, just to play through it physically. So this is going to allow the designers then to move forward with the format without being hindered by the old cards. Now, the one thing that I think they're going to need to change before they get to that point with Hearthstone is to remove the classic cards from the standard, because they're still going to have to balance everything around those, and there's huge cards in the standard classic that they would have to balance around, i.e. the Druid combo, which is almost an auto include in a lot of decks. So Maybe they might have to come back and revisit what standard format is, or maybe they will just simply change those cards as time goes on. I guess that's left to be seen. Think of it in the sense that, you know, in a vintage format, say, if you were playing vintage Magic, and that was the only format that was available to you when you were playing Magic, everybody would need to go buy Black Lotuses. I don't know what the current market rate for Black Lotuses are, but I'm thinking it's in the thousands of dollars range, because they're very, very rare and you can't get them anywhere else other than in the vintage packs. So you're breaking down that monetary barrier for the new player to come in. A lot of people are angry because now cards like Dr. Boom, which they crafted, will now be relegated to the wild format. This is perfectly fine. Nobody is saying you can't play with your Dr. Booms anymore. It's the same way that the Black Lotus, you can still play a Black Lotus, but just not in certain formats. So people complaining that, oh no, all my card collection is useless, it's total BS. Your card collection is not useless. It's perfectly usable in wild format. Had they not changed anything, wild format would be just the format that we would have in Hearthstone right now. So it's not a bad thing that they're cycling cards out. Think about it a little bit. It's not a bad thing. One of the other negative reactions I've seen is that people are saying, you know, rip Oil Rogue, or rip Secret Paladin, or rip Muster for Battle, as if these decks are going to be completely obscure in the new meta. That may be the case, but they're going to print new cards that have very similar effects or different effects that are more interesting and powerful, or similarly interesting and powerful in any event, and you'll still be able to play Secret Paladin in Wild. So nobody is killing a deck, it's just moving to a different format. The only negative, and really the only one that I'm going to acknowledge in all of these changes that have come, is that the adventures will no longer be purchasable, at least the ones that have rotated out of Standard. And that's a bad thing for two reasons. The first is that the newer player won't be able to get to play the solo adventure, which are kind of interesting. I mean, they're not my favorite thing to do in Hearthstone, but they are kind of interesting, and some people enjoy them. Secondly, though, is that in order to get the cards from the old adventures, you're going to have to craft them, and that does seem to be a little bit of a barrier to entry if you want to make a wild format deck. But if you want to play vintage Magic, and I'm not saying that this justifies it in Hearthstone, but if you want to play vintage Magic, it's a huge investment. Even some of the cheapest decks in vintage are $700 or $800. So there is a barrier to entry in any game that you play. If you play Magic Standard, let's say you're just playing Magic Standard, each year that a format rotates, you're going to have to update decks. The Standard breaks decks. It brings in new cards that are must-haves for the new meta. Money needs to be spent. We've been spoiled in Hearthstone in the sense that you can play Hearthstone for pretty much free if you wanted to. You might not be meta competitive all the time if there's not a budget deck that is a top-tier deck, but at least you can still play. In Magic, the only way you can do that is to print off your own cards, and no card store in their right mind is going to let you proxy in printed off cards to go play Friday Night Magic. So you do need to buy it, and a meta top tier deck in Magic the Gathering, in any given standard format, you're probably looking $200 to $400. If you spent $200 to $400 on the standard format in Hearthstone, I think you would have a pretty damn good collection. So really nothing too egregious there. Lots of positive changes, guys. I'm really looking forward to the new standard and wild formats in Hearthstone. Leave me your opinions below. Maybe you think I'm completely out to lunch. Let me know why, but I think it's a very positive change. Until next time, guys. Bye-bye.